before I introduce each one of you, allow me to first lay the case bare, the reason why it's important to have this discussion, and so that also everybody who is joining us and who is part of this discussion can have a background to why it is important that we have this kind of conversation going on around this time. The issue or the elephant in the room is concerning public funding of political parties. We are all aware of the legal instrument that does support public funding of political parties. To be specific, the Political Parties and Organizations Amendment Act 2010 that speaks to financing or funding political parties on three accounts. That's section 14A, but specific to clause B, which is the main area of discussion. 14A clause A, for those who are following, reads that use of government or public resources for political party or organization activities, government shall contribute funds or other public resources, and I need to emphasize there something, all other public resources towards the activities of political parties or organizations represented in parliament in accordance with the following principles. Principle A, registered political parties or organizations shall be funded by government under this act in respect of elections and their normal day-to-day activities. And then principle B, which is of interest to this discussion, in respect of elections, government shall finance political party organizations and parties on equal basis. And then principle C, which is in respect of normal day-to-day activities, funding shall be based on numerical strength of each political party or organization in parliament. Now, what is the practice concerning principle B? 14A principle B is that ever since this amendment was made and the financing of political parties done in 2015, principle B has been consistently ignored by government. So this is the basis against which we think we should have a very objective conversation around public funding, especially in respect to financing participation in elections. That said, allow me to introduce my panelists, starting with Dr. Daniel Walyemera, who is an electoral reform scholar who has published studies on a number of subjects, including campaign finance, and for over 14 years was engaged in politics, at some point served as the Secretary General of the Conservative Party and was the pioneer chairperson of the Council of Secretaries General of the Inter-Party Organization for Dialogue, IPOD. He's also a scholar of Western Cape University in South Africa. You are most welcome, Dr. Daniel Walyemera.
Thank you very much.
Our next panelist is Frank Rusa. Frank Rusa is the first African country representative of the Netherlands Institute for Multi-Party Democracy. Frank serves as the executive secretary of the Inter-Party Organization for Dialogue, IPOD, a platform we know very well that is promoting dialogue alongside political competition. Of significance, it's important I note this, that Frank is remembered to have managed the controversy of nominating Dr. Kizza Besigye to contest for presidential elections while he was in incarceration at the time when Frank served as the head of legal department at EC. Frank is also a Harvard scholar. Frank, you're most welcome.
Thank you so much, Felix, for those kind words.
And I will now introduce the only lady we have in her own right. I'll talk about Norbert Mao when she joins. But for now, we have Alice Ejanut Alaso. I hope I pronounced the middle name correct, Alice.
Thank you.
Yes, Alice is a professional teacher and a politician. And currently she's the acting national coordinator for Alliance for National Transformation. And I hope the next time I host you, Alice, you will not be having the title acting. I want to see you substantive national coordinator of ANT. Yeah,
yes.
but Alice also served as the Secretary General for FDC, a party where she was among the founders. She since then moved on to join ANT, but she also served as the Deputy President for Eastern Region Wales at FDC. And she's a former legislator in Parliament. And I think you were in Parliament for about 3 terms, 2 terms as Woman MP Soroti, and then 1 term as Serere, Woman MP. So that's 15 years of experience. So you combine experience as a legislator, you combine experience as someone who has run a party in 2 different parties, that is FDC and ANT. I think you are the right person on the stage. You're most welcome, Honorable Alice.
Thank you very much, Felix, for that very elaborate introduction. Yes, you mentioned my name fairly well. The rest of it, you will have to get it when you visit TESO. But I am happy to be here. I am acting because we have not yet held the first National Delegates Conference. And once it is done, then the constitution of the ANT provides that there will be an election for a chairperson. So we will drop those coordination titles and then go into substantive elected offices. I'm hoping that the party could do those type of that type of election probably latest by the beginning of end of 2023 or 24, because we've started the process of working at the grassroots now to generate the National Delegates Conference. But I am happy to be part of this discussion, and I hope that I will be able to make a bit of input and then run back to a party meeting, which is taking place as we talk now.
Okay, thank you. I'll make sure that I don't hold you much longer, so that we can get so much from you before you run out. But let me, and that means that let me quickly get this started, and I'm going to start with Dr. Daniel, you combined about 2 hats. You're a scholar in this area, but also partly served as a party leader. So can you lay a foundation for this discussion where we are discussing political party funding, especially looking at the lessons of 2021 general elections? Help anybody following understand, set the stage.
Thank you very much, Felix. And I would like to thank the organization for inviting me to come and share my thoughts and build onto this subject that is not fully developed in Uganda. If you look at other countries neighboring us, you can clearly state without doubt that there is still a lot to be done in this area of political financing, in the area of campaign financing. Campaign financing obviously is political financing and campaign financing, which is a subset of it, is a rather interesting subject. Sometimes if you talk even to the most highly qualified persons, they'll tell you, what the hell is that? I mean, is it even relevant? And when you go down to begin to explain this animal called political financing, eventually they begin to appreciate its role politically, socially, economically, and it's a very important subject. It's quite a recent subject compared to other subjects that have been around in the world, because, for example, the very first regulations on political financing in Uruguay and the US and Turkey. But subsequently, it has caught on because of the key role that a political party plays in the governance of a country. A political party and the role it plays in keeping in check those who are in government is a public good. Because if there was nobody checking the ruling party and there is nobody looking at what they are doing, we would have real challenges. Consequently, this political party, the existence of an organization called a political party is a public good, and because it's a public good, just like you construct roads and construct bridges, consequently a political party requires public money to continue to do its duty of checking those we have periodically elected to govern us. Obviously, as I've stated, this wasn't a big issue, but eventually it becomes a big issue because, as I've stated, the political party has a very serious role to play in society. And consequently, money or the public funding of a political party, I'm going to consequently speak about the private funding of a political party, but let me first begin with the public funding of a political party. The public funding of a political party consequently is very, very, very important because through that political party is where you nurture people who are then able to come to train to be leaders, but not only to train to be leaders, but to train to be the government in waiting. Because once the people who are in the ruling party, once they lose an election, they go away, and then we have the party that is in the opposition going into the fact that they will be now the ones leading. So in a sense, the political party needs to be funded with public funds. Why? Because it's a nursery bed that nurtures the leaders that will take over the leadership of the country. And if they're not nurtured well, then you're going to have challenges with leaders at the top. Consequently, you need money in politics. And that money, as you've indicated, our section 14A provides for two facets of categories of political financing. One facet of it, or one limb of it, is the political financing, which is the general one that provides for the day-to-day running of a political party. The funds that are used to do day-to-day activities of a political party. So those are throughout the electoral cycle. And they may include things like nurturing youth to become leaders, women activities, research, which my senior colleague Frank will talk about very eloquently, because I'm aware IPOD does a bit of support, financial support in this regard to political parties, not only in Uganda, but all over Africa. I've visited some of these countries where NIMD is doing this. So the other limb, which is also covered in section 14, is the campaign financing. So the campaign financing then is the money that ordinarily should be provided to the political party before or during the campaign period. Now, we obviously have a challenge with the law in Uganda in the sense that it's not very elaborately captured. It doesn't set proper criteria of how this public money should be shared out. We have seen the little money that has been spent, that has been sent out. I think initially it was about 10 billion, of which NRM took the bigger chunk, which was 7. Then there was about 15 billion. Still, the NRM took the bigger chunk, which is creating challenges. The organization that disburses that money is not the organization that is legally established to disburse this money. It does not have sufficient expertise to disburse that money. The Electoral Commission, its core duty is to conduct elections, not disbursement of money, campaign financing or political financing. When you go to countries like Germany, you'd find that there are dedicated institutions that are in charge of the process of disbursing this money, that are in charge of the process of setting a criteria of how political parties receive this money, and the criteria, before they come up with the criteria, the whole process is participatory. All the political players participate in the criteria of how this money would be distributed. If you go to Kenya here, not only is about 5% of the budget of Kenya allocated to political financing, but there are set time periods when this money should be released and to which political party it should be released. In Uganda here, the periods when the money is released only to favor the ruling party to do its activities. And when it's released, they rely on the provision section 14A that talks about representation, numerical strength in parliament, which is really absurd, because for the 2 chunks or so that the government has given out, that's the criteria. And they have left the other chunk, they have left the other limb of section 14A that says for the day-to-day running of the party, for campaigns, the money should be disbursed to the political parties equally. And there's been lots of debates, and one of those debates, Zairu Zindana did a very good analysis of it, and I'm going to quote him. He says, if, for example, Conservative Party has 1 MP or JMA has 1 MP, and it receives a share of that money, but then you have special interest groups, you have independents, you have youth who have a lot more representatives, MP representatives in parliament than Conservative Party that has 1 MP or JMA that has 1 MP or whichever party that has 1 MP. So the criteria, so that party receives money, but all these other very, very many MPs do not receive any money because the section 14 doesn't talk about them. But they are representatives of citizens, and these citizens are Uganda. Consequently, we see that there is a challenge with this section 14A, and we therefore need a comprehensive law to deal, a specific and comprehensive law to deal with the political financing in Uganda. And there have been calls for this. I know I'm part of certain efforts to ensure that there is sufficient pressure to the government to ensure that this law is put in place, and to ensure that whatever provisions that we have now, the specific provision section 14A, is implemented fairly, because these are public funds that they are disbursing out. I'll say a little more later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doctor. You've made justice to get us started. And before Honorable Alice Alaso leaves us, and this is where now I bring you on board. There is a very interesting, as a follow-up on the foundation Doctor has given us. It's clear that when you look at the precedent of 2021 elections, it's almost we are almost concluding that that section 14A that speaks to the principle B has been ignored consistently, and I want to add also another word, arrogantly. What explains this behavior of government to disregard this legal instrument that instructs them to finance political parties for purposes of elections? And what effect does this have to political party participation in the elections?
Thank you very much, moderator. I also want to express my appreciation for the opportunity you've given me to participate in this very, very important discussion. I like the foundation that Dr. Dan has laid as to the importance of this public financing to political parties. And I don't think we need to repeat that because this is extremely, extremely important. But I also want to run a bit of a disclaimer really, not a disclaimer, but just express our own position and say to you that as the ANT, we are not beneficiaries because we probably, this is far out of our reach because the law provides for one member of parliament. And yet for us, we are running one district local government. We are running 4 sub-counties. We have 20 LC5 councillors and the 24 LC3 councillors. We don't qualify because of the law to even be in IPOD and to be in this kind of discussion. But perhaps because we have some ideas, we are happy to be in this kind of participation. So what the absence of financing does to political parties is really to lock out participation. I mean, when you don't fund political parties, you are making it hard for parties to engage politically. There are studies in this country, but besides, before I get to studies, we are looking at experience here. The cost of entering the political space, which Dr. Dan called the incubator, is very high, both for individuals and for political parties. So if you can't get people nominated, you automatically lock good people out. And therefore, what we have now, the situation where the rich, the crafty, the connected, the swindlers who can access money will ensure that they're the ones that are getting nominated and they enter into that space. Secondly, political parties need to be developed, again, as he said, as institutions of governance, not as personal to holder. Now, if you do not engage public funding into this atmosphere, then you are nurturing the strongman syndrome. And with the strongman syndrome, you will have political parties that are beholden to the owner who ensures that they fund the political activities therein. And that is also not good for the health of our democratic and governance dispensation. The other aspect of it is then you deny the opportunity to political parties to begin practicing accountability in political handling of public resources. Because so we get our resources, we keep quiet with them. If we are to account to the public on maybe 1 billion shillings, we'll then be learning how to practice transparency. And at the end of the day, we assume that we get into office and we are using public resources. We will have a demonstrated track record in which we have used public monies. The last bit of my thought has to do with why the NRM is not giving you money, those who are entitled. And that goes into the provision of Article 14A. One, because NRM is known openly as using public monies. Right now, as we talk, the human resources they are using, they are deploying, the RDCs, the WHOs, they are funded by us, the taxpayer. The patronage system and all that is funded by you and I. So they are not in a hurry because they are already tapping into that. That's why I'm even wondering why we could have this discussion without one of them explaining why they are blatantly ignoring the law. We should have had one panelist from the NRM here to explain to us why they ignore the provisions of the law. That is extremely important. And then, of course, I think the NRM is not envisaging a peaceful political transition in this country. So the basis that Dr. Dan, the foundation Dr. Dan has laid for us, doesn't seem to make sense for them. The context in which this country is being governed is the context of the very unlikely possibility of a peaceful political transition. Therefore, you don't need to incubate leaders, you don't need to train them, you don't need to practice accountable and good governance in the political institutions, because we think the NRM is running the alpha and the omega system in this country. And at the end of the day, there is no need for transition. And that's very dangerous for this country. One day we will wake up and find that change has happened, whether we like it or we don't. And when change happens in this country, we will go into hands that are inexperienced, people who are not groomed to lead this nation, and it will be disaster upon disaster. So my thinking is that this discussion, therefore, should really continue, not only to cause them to give us the resources to run our activities, but to prepare for the possibility of a transition. And we would like to see a possible but peaceful transition in this country, backed by institutions that are credible and can run the show as alternative governments.
Wow, interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Honorable. Thank you so much and I hope I will still have you for another question, but before I let you go, let me first bring in Frank here. Frank, help us understand this discussion around political party funding. Is there a conversation happening within IPOD, or what could be IPOD's position, especially concerning financing political parties in respect to elections? Is this conversation being held within the IPOD space?
Yeah, thank you so much, Felix. And I'd like to appreciate Dr. Walemera and Honorable Alice Alaso for eloquently making the case for why political parties in Uganda need public funding. I think for me as an individual, I would imagine that the key funders of a political party should be its members, should be its supporters. In modern countries, that's the main source of political party funding. But we have to realize that Uganda has had political parties in abeyance for 20 years. What we have are young political parties that have suffered a lot of demonization in the past. And because of that, they find themselves in a unique situation. I'll not dwell a lot on what the roles they play as incubators of political leadership, but I need to emphasize, however, one point that is missing out is that we need to also look at public funding to political parties from a national security perspective. You see, political parties are also the gatekeepers of our country's sovereignty. They're the gatekeepers of our democracy. We need to think about political parties just beyond the competition for power that we see around election times, and look at them as vehicles that can work together to deal with serious, important cross-party issues that are aligned to national development objectives. Now, that said, you've asked me a specific question to talk about the conversation in IPOD. I would like also to first associate myself with the concerns of Honorable Alice Alaso on the fact that it seems that the political parties we think about in our country when it comes to political party funding are those that have got representatives in parliament, which is not necessarily the correct way of analyzing or assessing effective political parties. There could be political parties that are effective at the sub-regional level. There could be political parties that are effective and have strong structures like the ANT, but do not have members of parliament as yet. Should we keep them out of the public conversation and the discussion of the future of our country because they are yet to have one member of parliament? I think there is something we need to do about the criteria. But just talk about the conversation that is going on in IPOD. In 2010, there was a conversation that happened in IPOD that led to the amendment of the Political Parties and Organizations Act to introduce Section 14A to provide for public funding of political parties with representation in parliament. Ever since that law was amended, I think the first tranche of funds came through to the political parties somewhere in 2015. And ever since that time, it has always been 10 billion that is allocated in accordance with the numerical strength of political parties in parliament. Of course, that means that NRM takes the lion's share because it has always been commanding a presence in the parliament of almost 80%, and leaves the small parties like JEMA and now PPP and them like that jumping off with about 40 million out of a release, 45 million out of a release of about 10 billion. So there was two complaints coming out from the political parties. One was that the money was not enough, but two was that even the money which is there, which is little, is not shared equitably. And the arguments were that if you say because somebody is small, he doesn't deserve support. That it would be akin to starving a child. It is the children who need milk, not the adults. So there was that kind of argument. Now, that aside, there's also the problem of Section 14, which outlaws funding from foreign sources. NIMD, the organization that I represent, is a key partner to Ugandan political parties. And we have been doing a lot of resource mobilization for them, especially from the international development community. But even then, there are limitations in the law. You cannot get money from a foreign source to a single political party beyond 400 million per year. Now, the maximum amount of money you can get for a political party from all sources that are foreign is 200,000 currency points, which goes to about 4 billion. But as somebody who understands how politics works and the cost of politics, we recently did a cost of politics study with the Westminster Foundation for Democracy. I can tell you 4 billion shillings is a drop in the ocean of the amounts of money a serious political party needs to run its affairs. And we should think about the affairs of political parties beyond elections. A lot of money goes around elections, I agree. But outside election times, parties need structures, they need international democracy, they need to develop policy documents, they need youth leagues that are functional, women's leagues that are functional. They need a lot of things to be able to deliver that job of being incubators of national leadership, of being responsive to their citizens. So there's all that going on. But let me also just add that right now, as recent as 2 days ago, we had a conversation about that part of the law that is never implemented. The one which says that during elections, political parties with representation in parliament need to get equal share of the monies. So this was raised in the last summit of presidents at Kololo, and the political parties put it to the ruling party, who happen to be the chairs of IPOD at the moment, that it is a shame that every time we get to elections, that law or that section of the law is disregarded. And there was a commitment from the chairman of the NRM, who's also the president of Uganda, that the balance of the arrears of the last financial year, when it comes through this time, it will be shared equally. So we are still pushing for that. We are working with the Ministry of Finance, with the Office of the Prime Minister and the Electoral Commission, and I hope that government will come through with that. So right now, the conversation, of course, you must have heard that the money was increased from 10 billion, and the promise now is 35 billion. Last year, financial year, it was 20 billion. We are still pressing to receive the other 15 billion, but we're yet to see some progress on that. But finally, I just wanted to say also that the same law that outlaws foreign funding for political parties places a slap on the wrist sort of punishment for anyone who breaks the law. The punishment is if they catch you getting money from foreign sources, including even outlawed entities, the punishment is a fine of 72 currency points, which translates to about 1.4 million. You can imagine punishing somebody with a fine of 1.4 for getting money from wrong sources. Already, that's a vulnerability. There's a lot of vulnerability even in the law. So if our political parties don't have enough money and they're going to be tempted to go external, then we're making them very vulnerable, and it becomes a national security issue. So for now, I will stop it at that. But I am glad that this conversation is coming to the public square. I think we really need to interrogate this question and find a way forward.
Wow, interesting. And while you are saying that there are those outlawed entities from which, against which you cannot receive funding from, I don't know whether government has really put out a list of which are those entities that are a no-go area, so that if I'm a political party, I know that entity ABCD I don't have to get resources from there, so that the law doesn't catch me. Does government have such a list?
Yeah, first of all, I need to say that there are 3 elements of that law. Element number 1, anybody who gets money from any foreigner, whether it's an individual, whether it's an international NGO, whether it's a foreign embassy, whether it's a foreign country, you can't get more than 400 million in a period of 12 months, anyone. Number 2, from all those sources which are external, whether they are not, even if they're not terrorist organizations, you can't get more than 4 billion from all external sources. And if you get that money, you're supposed to announce it to the Electoral Commission. That is what the law says. However, you are prohibited and it is punishable to get money from countries or organizations that have been listed as terrorist organizations or terrorist or hostile nations. Now, the Ministry of Internal Affairs is supposed to update to a list of those terrorist organizations and countries periodically with Parliament. I am not sure when that was last done, but I think that's what the law says, that the Ministry of Internal Affairs needs to give that list so that anybody knows that those are not allowed to get money from those people and that it is punishable under the law. Thank you so much, Frank. We've been joined by Norbert Mao. I promised to introduce Norbert Mao when he's around. And Norbert, you are most welcome. People often refer you to as Chairman Mao, but Norbert Mao is a lawyer, politician, and the current president for the Democratic Party. The position he has held since 2010 and is the former presidential candidate in the just concluded 2021 elections. And if the statistics which I have that I picked from EC are true, and I think they are true, you were able to garner 57,682 votes, making you the 5th out of the 11 candidates. At least you were among the top 5 in the race. And maybe you'll share with us whether denying you public funding in regard to elections probably is the reason why you are not now the sworn-in president of Uganda. But Norbert Mao, you are most welcome to this discussion that we are having today. Norbert, are you there? Honorable Norbert Mao, are you there? I can see Norbert Mao online, but I think he's muted. I can't pick him. But as we get through with Norbert Mao, let me come back to Doctor. I hope your network really stabilizes, Norbert. We need to have this. We need to have you on this conversation. But let me come back to Doctor here. Let me go a bit. Let me speak the language, Doctor, you'd want to hear. You've heard of that. There have been an argument made by some scholars and theorists that, for example, like Dr. Magnus Hoffman, argued that political funding should be based on all informed by the country's political goals. The assumption is that every country must have a political goal or political goals. And in that case, it mainly political goals determine how people consider politics in their democratic system, and also on the whole, but also in particular how political parties and election campaigns should be organized. This begs the question, does Uganda have political goals against which we can have a discussion around financing politics, and probably how should the funding architecture of politics and political parties specifically be structured?
Thank you very much, Bwana Felix. I don't think Uganda has that political goal or political goals, as that scholar says, that then lead us to a community. And Frank has been talking about this, a community that has a democracy that is sustainable. What we have, Honorable Alaso has been speaking about this, a few strong men and hangers-on who have grabbed power, and they want to keep this power as long as possible. So if you're talking about political goals of this entity, this colonial entity called Uganda, or artificial entity called Uganda, then the political goals are the political goals of that small cabal of people who have held the rest of Ugandans at a ransom, and theirs is simply to hold power as long as possible and pass it on to their kith and kin. So you can't say that Uganda as a political entity has political goals. What we have is a few strong men ensuring that they stay in power forever, that they pass on this power to their blood relations. But speaking about the wider issue of the forms of funding. There are various forms of funding, about 5 of them, and they are informed by ideologies. One of them is egalitarian, the other one is libertarian. So for example, in the US, which goes with the libertarian ideology, they prefer to have a less relaxed arrangement about funding regulations to enable not only free speech, but also to enable association. The egalitarian mode prefers more restriction, more limits on donations, more limits on expenditure. The model prefers more rules on how this money comes into politics. And consequently, you have countries like Germany that have very strict rules on how money is used in elections. And if your funds going beyond what is allowed by the law, there are very stringent terms, including jail terms for somebody who messes around with, for example, electoral financing in Germany. Why? Because if you messed with the law, if you didn't abide by the law in that egalitarian model, then you're going to cause many challenges, including inflation to the economy, including corruption, political corruption, including all sorts of things, including not having a sustainable democracy that enables that political entity, whatever the political entity is, to move on. Just to point to what my senior colleague Frank said, if you do not have, and Alice Alaso, if you do not have a society that is providing an enabling environment for a plurality of political voices, you're going to have people who are going to do politics by other means. People are going to go to the bush because you've restricted how they engage with this political power. So if in terms of political goals for this country, I am sorry to say, Sir Comrade Felix, we do not have any. The only political goal is sustain this power until when I pass it over to my son or wife or whatever. We do not have any goals. Thank you.
Interesting. Thank you so much. To all our participants, online participants, you can type your questions or comments, and probably if anything that needs clarity from the panelists, then we'll be able to share it. But Frank, as you weigh in on the same question, but specifically also, I think it was Dr. who talks about why it is important to finance political parties, because they refer to them as public entities. And that begs a question. Are political parties in Uganda public entities or private entities? Especially looking at the way they are structured, how they are formed, how they function and behave, the challenges they have internally when it comes to managing these resources. What's your way in this matter? Are they political entities? Are they public entities, or are they private entities?
That's an interesting question. But you know, Felix, I don't know whether we should talk about what political parties are or what political parties should be.
It defines the public funding.
Yeah, via funding. Because when you say public, are they personal or are they really pro-people? I think we should all be aspiring to have political parties in what as they ought to be. We would like political parties to grow, to be vehicles for alternative policy articulation, to be ruling parties in waiting, to be issue-based, to be responsive, to drive the agenda for the country. That is our hope. At the moment, our political parties are not yet there. Our political parties are still personality-driven. They still hold in awe their founders. Many of them have founders who are stronger than the political parties themselves. But that is not a scenario we would like to maintain for a long time. Most of us who have been working in the deepening democracy field, most of us who have been working in strengthening of political parties, we are looking forward to the day when the political parties can actually be what they are supposed to be. And if we are to get them to where they are supposed to be, then we need to think about funding for them. Because one of the reasons why political parties are held hostage to their founders, and it's because some of these founders are so strong, they even practically finance these political parties. They can tell you some individuals, and we're not talking about, every time we talk about money, people think about NRM. But I want also to tell you that even in the opposition, there are certain leaders in the opposition that are stronger than their parties, and that the will of that leader has to always hold sway because of financial considerations. So for me, as a person who believes strongly in institutions, although I thank God for wonderful individuals, I believe it is institutions that survive the test of time. It is institutions that can guarantee national sustainability. We may be lucky to have some good individuals once in a while, but when we are thinking about sustainable interventions for national transformation, we need to think about institutions. And political parties as institutions, therefore, require some special attention. So even though in the interim, we may say they are still disorganized, they are still having dominant personalities at their helm, they are still serving selfish interests, which could be true, or it is still debatable. I still think we need to look at them in terms of what we wish them to be. How do we want political parties to evolve? And if we want them to evolve to be those responsive institutions that can determine the destiny of our nation, then we need to start providing the legal and institutional and financial infrastructure to make them live to those expectations.
Interesting. I really hope I can have Chairman Mao, because the number of interesting questions I would want Chairman Mao from where he is as a politician, as a party leader to respond to. But as I wait for Chairman Mao, and before I bring in the doctor here, let me again first throw Frank back in the deep end of the lake to help us understand, because in reality, for example, let's look at the context of Uganda, but not even just Uganda. When you look at most revolutionary regimes that transit into dominant parties, they tend to get fused with state institutions. It's difficult to separate the dominant party from state institutions. And this begs the question whether it is really possible for political parties to remain functioning independently if they are financed with public resources provided by the dominant party in power. Let's take an example, the NRM government.
Yeah, let me first clarify, because of what has been happening in many of our post-revolutionary countries, even people like us sometimes don't see the difference between the state, the government, and the ruling party. So people have a fusion. They think, for example, I've just asked a question, NRM financing political parties. NRM will never finance political parties. The amount of money we are talking to
NRM-led government.
Yes, the amount of money we are asking to give to political parties is coming from the public purse. It should be appropriated by parliament. It is taxpayers' money. It is not government giving. It is not NRM, the party. But so you see, the state will survive even after NRM stops being in power. So we are thinking about public funding, money coming from the taxpayer to the party. But of course, because we are faced with a situation whereby there's a seemingly a fusion of the party and the state, which is an unfortunate situation. That is one thing we should be working towards, to separate these two. Because as long as they continue to be looked as if they are one and the same, then we are having a problem. But I think that the other issue you're raising is the issue of, is it possible to have functional political parties in a dominant political system? Let me just tell you something. Without running the risk of being accused of being very sympathetic or being kind to the chairman of the NRM, I want to tell you that the chairman of the NRM, who leads a very dominant party in this country, is also the same person who has been pressing a lot, especially, and since Chairman Mao is on the online, he can also testify to this. He has been pressing so much on an issue-based interaction with other parties. I think at the last summit of leaders, he was saying he would like to see spaces like IPOD, hear what other parties are saying on his or his party's approach on public issues. He was saying he finds it difficult that the only time we are quarreling or talking to each other is either we are competing to win in elections, but we have not yet had so many conversations on substantive issues of transformation. And he was inviting the political parties in opposition to put more emphasis on that point. I think that also, in as much as dominant parties want to hold power for a very long time, there is an appetite which we need to explore. There's an appetite to have more issue-based interaction. And if you cannot have issue-based interaction if political parties are terribly weak, I think when the case was being made for public funding, increasing public funding, this point came across and was appreciated by all the people listening in, including the ruling party. The only challenge was that they were not as quick when the question was equitable distribution of what has been increased. But I guess that with time, that also needs to be emphasized. I believe that we need to be optimistic. Let's think about incremental gains. That is how some of us in the activist side of things, we keep pushing and registering increments, and hopefully we shall get there. But what is in no doubt is that we need strong political parties that are capable of doing what they're supposed to do.
Thank you so much. Doctor, do you want to weigh in this discussion on that matter?
Thank you very much. I totally agree with my senior colleague, Frank, on the issue of issue-based conversations, where a political party is coming to the table with how the country should be run, with how the economy should be run, with how the education sector should be run, with how the health sector should be run. And that can only happen if the political party is organized, if the political party has money to do research and find issues to discuss about, because you're not going to have somebody coming from right from their home, from their bed, and entering into a national conversation. They must have done some research in accordance with the ideology of that particular political party in order to come to the table with alternative ideas from those of the ruling party. Unfortunately, as Frank says, we have political parties that have individuals who have taken over. What the individual who is very strong, the big man, what the big man says is what the political party says. At times, actually, even what the political ideology of the political party is different from what the big man is saying, but once he has said it, that is it. Obviously, I would like to commend NIMD for when I was in politics. At least they used to support a bit of this. I don't know whether they are still continuing to do it, having left politics a while back, but they were supporting political parties. They were paying salaries for somebody, a researcher, to do research for a political party to ensure that when that political party comes to the table to discuss national issues, it is discussing national issues, it's presenting alternative solutions to the challenges that the country is facing, as opposed to those of the ruling party. I don't know, I hope they are still doing this. I hope NIMD is still doing this, because on many occasions, when you find our politicians and you go to, you can even go to parliament and all these other places where these discussions are held, you find that actually their conversations are lacking. Or, as I've indicated to you, the big man is discussing, but is discussing something that is contrary to the ideology that the political party espouses. So political parties should not just come to the national conversation without engaging in research, and that research should be issue-based, and those issues that they bring to the fore should be backed by the ideology that the political party espouses. Unfortunately, there is a political party in the country here that says that it is multi-ideological. So it has all sorts of ideologies, and when the issues come up, you don't know what are they from a capitalist angle? Are they from a communist angle? Are they from a socialist angle? You get stuck on knowing exactly what this political party is about. Nevertheless, we think that this national conversation should have individuals who come to the table when they have researched. Thank you.
Interesting. Still on that, we are, for those of you who are just joining us, with me I have Dr. Daniel Walyemera, who is an electoral reform scholar. I also have Frank Russa, who is the current country representative for NIMD, Netherlands for Multi-Party Democracy. And we are discussing public funding of political parties in Uganda's democratization process and looking at the lessons from 2021 general elections. I laid the foundation against which we are having this conversation in regard to how public funding of political parties is being done here in Uganda. And speaking to that, because there is, and I think it was Frank who talked about that there are other forms of fundraising for resources to run a political party beyond public funding. But now, again, I'm still with you here, Doctor. Why is it that most political parties are struggling to raise more resources from other sources, like memberships, donations, irrespective of the challenges within the legal framework and environment, but also pursuing the option of investments, like in other countries? I think the RPF of Rwanda runs an investment arm. It has, I think it's called Inyanga Industries, where it can raise some resources. UPC has the Obote Foundation and the Uganda House, although with its challenges, but overall, most of the political parties in Uganda here struggle to mobilize resources beyond public funding. What is the problem?
I think partly one of the challenges is these political parties, as I've indicated, they are not issue-based. Even if they tell you we are conservative, but you don't see anything conservative coming through from what the leaders are telling you. When they tell you we are libertarian, you don't see anything liberal values or coming out of what they're saying. So there are challenges with, first of all, the elite getting into these political parties. People who want issues, who want to listen to issues, can't get into such political parties. And the few elites that you get who are trying to support these political parties, the few, very few, are usually taken up by what resources, what opportunities are provided when they support these political parties. Then the very, very small percentage of these elites would join a political party because of what the ideology that the political party espouses. I was in a political party and I've been part of coalitions, IPC, and so on. And this partly creates the so-called big man syndrome. And possibly the lack of accountability then that occurs when these leaders get into government. For example, I was part of a political party, and when we were holding party functions, we didn't know where the money was coming from. We just see things happening. I am the secretary general of the party, but I don't know where the money is coming from. The big man has said, hey, I am wondering, me, the secretary general, I don't know where this money has come from. So those are the kinds of unaccountable structures that we have within these political parties, be they the ruling parties or opposition parties. Until NIMD came, when went to Ghana and created the IPOD, well, there was even no way, you didn't know where if you went into these parties and you ask a very high level leader, where is, apart from the money that, little money that the electoral commission is giving you from public funding, you ask, where did you get your money for the last presidential elections? You would be surprised. People do not know. They just saw people driving brand new cars for campaigns and so on. They didn't know. So there are real challenges of these political parties that are unaccountable in attracting, for example, membership fees. And by the way, this is not only a problem here in Uganda. Recently, I was listening to a program in South Africa, and there was only one person that had given money to the public purse. The way the public funding works in South Africa is slightly different. So if a private person gives a political party money, then that is also paired up with public money. And there was only one individual that had given money to a political party. So it's not just a Ugandan problem. The issue of funding, private funding, it's a big issue. It's all over Africa. There are real challenges with political parties getting resources to do their business. But and you see, as I've indicated, it brings the big man syndrome because the leader has gotten money. You, the party leaders, don't know where this money is coming from, but the money is being disbursed to do party work. Possibly, some of this money is coming from people who want to drive the agenda of the political party. And that is not exactly good because the political party can be captured by interests that are not the interests of, that are not in tandem with the interests of the country. And consequently, the very reason why there should be a limit on how much money from those private sources, whatever the private sources, comes in. Obviously, we have a framework here that my senior Rusa talked about, but that framework still on how to limit money that comes in is still not sufficient. It needs a bit of review so that we have a proper framework on how money that's coming in from foreign sources is handled. If you opened up a political party and you said you are going to rely on membership fees, I still have my party's cards here in my office. If you sold cards, we used to sell cards at 1,000, 2,000, and nobody would buy. But you see people saying, oh, we support this party, we support, hey, Secretary General, but nobody is paying the 2,000, not $2,000, not 2,000 rand, 2,000 Uganda shillings. So there are real challenges of political party raising money. And when they raise, these political parties raise this money, the big man or the few leaders within the party are the ones finding this money, and the other leaders don't know where this money is coming from. It just appears. So possibly this money is from wrong sources. So the idea that a political party should have businesses that it is running, which then generate money for that political party, I think it's a good idea. But then there are challenges. The flip side of that argument is then you are trying to move the party away from its core duty, which is to fight, which is to provide alternative agendas to what the government has provided, which is to mobilize people, to nurture people to become leaders who then can take over from government. So whereas I support it that the political party should be engaged in business, it should be done very carefully in such a manner that then it does not interfere with what the core mandate of a political party is, which is to keep the ruling party in check. Thank you.
Okay, Frank, I want to bring you in here because you partly raised the issue of the other alternatives of financing political parties beyond public funding. What are your thoughts on the fact that most political parties in Uganda struggle to raise resources outside public funding?
Yeah, as Ndugu Alemera said, the voters in Uganda has been cultured to expect money from the political party, as opposed to giving money to the political party. Today, Ugandans, when the election time comes, it is almost like a harvest season for farmers, because the voters are waiting for the politicians to come and ask the politicians for money because they think politics is a money-making endeavor. We are sending you to get money, so invest in us now and you go and get your money. That is, unfortunately, the thinking in our society today. So for any political party, if the level of civic consciousness remains at that level, for us to make some strides in this area, we also need there has to be some bit of evolution in the way our society thinks about politics and thinks about political parties in terms of what politics is about and the intersection of politics, development, service delivery, and their ordinary lives, which is not yet very clear. So there is a gap there in the form of civic education. So in terms of mobilizing money from the population, political parties are really handicapped. That leaves political parties at the mercy of either donors or other funders, external funders. Now, what people don't know about donors, even in Uganda today, there is no donor who gives money directly to a political party. There has been many accusations in the media about DGF, about I don't know what, but I can tell you as somebody who has worked in this space for the last 12 years, donors don't give money to political parties directly. They would rather give it to NIMD, which is a civil society organization, an NGO, an international NGO, which will have political parties as beneficiaries. So the support to political parties is in kind. So you give them training, you give them some support in terms of training and capacity building and all sorts of things. Even when you are doing things for them, you do them in kind. Now, the challenge with that is that donor architecture rotates around donor objectives and priorities that keep changing as the governments in their capitals change. You may find that the priority of the government in Netherlands today, or the government in the UK, or the government in Sweden, has certain other priorities they think about when it comes to African countries and all this kind of thing. So even their donor architecture has to be channeled on their interests and the priorities that they have at any given time. Those priorities may have nothing to do with the priorities of a political party or the priorities of a Ugandan citizen for that matter. So then political parties become limited to receive money only when their interests intersect with the interests of a given donor. For example, we may be interested in supporting young people and women and gender issues. If a political party is also interested in that, then maybe there may be funding for that. But you'll never find funding for mobilization, funding for building party structures, funding for the other things that are important for the political parties. So the limitations of donor funding, coupled with the reluctance of the population because of civic handicaps to support politics and political parties, leaves the ball in the hands of government. And I'm thinking that government should not look at supporting political parties as a favor it is doing to political leaders, or as it needs to look at it in terms of a sustainability mechanism for national transformation. Because although those of us who are on social media, who just watch and listen to debates, even from our leaders on social media, we get worried. We get worried about where this country is going to go in the next couple. The quality of conversation, the people who are aspiring to lead this country, when you hear their opinions, you get worried. Now, of course, when you go to the younger generation of those who are criticizing it, it is even worse. So the only incubators, did you know, for example, people criticize China. Let me tell you something else little about China. People criticize China for being a semi-autocratic authoritarian system. But in the Chinese Communist Party, which runs that country, not everybody can just become a member of the Chinese Communist Party. The Chinese Communist Party does not have more than 90 million members. People after university apply and go through competition to be recruited into the Chinese Communist Party. And the leadership you become nurtured from the word go. It is a state-controlled party. It is clearly not the most democratic, but you can see that there is a method on incubation of leadership. You can see that they are not leaving anything to chance. Today, any party, and let's not talk about NRM alone, let's even go to DP, let's go to CP, let's go to FDC and whatever, and you try to look at what structures they have in place to build party leadership or incubate leadership in the parties, you'll be worried. At NIMD, we are trying to work with the youth leagues of the parties and the party leaders to build intergenerational conversations. And the reason why we're trying to do this is to fill the gaps that are there because of lack of. And when you ask the political leaders, why don't you have serious incubation strategies for political leadership? They'll tell you the same story of lack of capacity, financial capacity, logistical capacity, know-how, and all these kind of things. So, Felix, beyond the talking about money being the importance of money, I think, every time you say, I have realized that it is better to come up with idea and then the money follows the idea. Because when you begin by saying we need the money, so then we shall give you the ideas, then we get it wrong. We need to get the idea right so that the money follows the idea. The idea for why we need to fund political parties is a national security idea. It is an idea for sustaining our country, looking at 50 years ahead, building the necessary infrastructure to consolidate what has been achieved by those who came before us, and also to create an opportunity for it to be built upon and even to go ahead. There is an urgent need for leadership development in all the political parties in Uganda, including the dominant ruling party. That leadership will not happen unless resources are put in place to equip the young people with necessary skills in a systematic way, in an organized way. There should be policy documents. Today, if you ask any of these people who would like to appear on TV talk shows what the ideological differences are between the parties they support and those that they oppose, you'll be shocked. Some of them don't even know that a political party needs to have a distinct ideological footing, which is the prescription of the solutions that party is prescribing for the country. Now, if we continue in this kind of thinking, of people thinking that politics is about winning and going to parliament to earn money, we are putting our country at risk, because then we shall not have political parties as vehicles of solutions to national problems today, tomorrow, and in the future. So for me, my argument for funding of political parties is based on securing the future. NRM likes to say securing the future. If you really want to secure the future, we need to take our political parties seriously and give them capacity to build the necessary army that shall secure our future.
Interesting. Fair enough. And there's some questions that are coming through. Let me first throw this one to Doctor before we continue with our line of questioning. It's not necessarily in line with the financing, but I think one of the participants in the is raising the question that what could be the ideal number of political parties a country should have. I think it's disturbed by the number of many political parties, for example, in Uganda, according to him, and whether there is any value add. Probably, could you help answer that question, Doctor?
I think I've been part of a forum when I was initially in politics, where this question was being posed. Are the political parties in Uganda too many? And that was this question was being posed by a senior citizen of this country, Amanya Mushega, when he was vice chairman of FDC, and then he used to occasionally sit in, chair some of the meetings at the National Consultative Forum for Political Parties, where he represented my political party. And subsequently, we saw a clamp down on the political parties within the country. We saw some of them being taken to court on the basis that they had not accounted. And some of the leaders in the political parties who had contacted me to represent them in court were arguing that, but how can you ask us to account when you have not given us anything? You have not given us anything, but you're saying we should account. Because the money that you are asking us to account, you have not given us. So, but the law, I think about section 10 or so of the Political Parties and Organizations Act requires that a political party must provide accountability annually to the Electoral Commission. So they were using this law, the Electoral Commission lawyers, to cut down on the political parties within Uganda, and they have cut them down. I think about 6 or 7 or 8 of them have been deregistered. Having said that, I am not a proponent of the cutting down of political parties. What is key, and I got this discussion. We went for a benchmarking visit with to the IEBC. In Kenya, the electoral body of Kenya, and it was the same conversation there. The register of political parties was saying Kenya has now 196, 160 something, 150 something political parties. Like Frank is saying, what is the ideology of all these political parties? And those were real challenges. So, but for me, I'm not. My view is that there shouldn't be a restriction on how many political parties a country should have. The restriction, there only should be stringent measures on how a political party gets registered. Because many of these parties that the Electoral Commission was registering recently were registered as proxy parties by the intelligence in here to act in the referendum as opposition parties, as a proxy opposition. Because I think during that time, the key opposition parties boycotted that process. So the intelligence system here thought that they would create these political parties. And these were really, some of them are my friends. I hope they are not on the call. But some of these were really one-man political parties. Once you see him, he's the political party. He's the Secretary General, he's the president, he's everything. And therefore, we would not want to have so many political parties that where you see, and Amanya Mushega was saying this, that you are the political party, you are here, you are alone, you are it. When you hold a delegates conference, you can even hold it in your sitting room because you are the only one. That's how he would joke at the National Consultative Forum. So for me, I'm not for, obviously there are countries where you see only two political parties like the US. And because these parties are issue-based, they have ideologies. If you came with another political party, people will be asking, what is it that you bring to the table? What's your ideology? What's the philosophical angling of how you're going to resolve the national issues? Here, it's not the case. Why I argue that there should not be a restriction on political registration of political parties, as many as possible, as long as there are stringent legal measures to ensure that we don't have fake, if I may call them so, political parties, is that when you lock out people who have ideas and want to participate in the country's governance, you then create disgruntlement, and some of these elements may go out to do their politics by other means. They may go to the bush and create armed groups and that kind of thing, which then leads to a general instability of the country. So you don't want to go down that road. But then you do not want, again, to leave it so relaxed that you have the one-man political parties that I'm talking about. So there needs to be a balance that the regulatory framework of registration of political parties is stringent enough to allow genuine political players to register that their political parties, but not too stringent enough not to allow those who are genuine but are not do not have meet the whole criteria. I've been to countries where a political party is in one part of the country and has its ideology. But the ideology in brackets may be race or anything else. You go to a country and you find that that political party is only in the West Nile, and that's where it has the so-called regional political parties that Frank was talking about. And those should not be, because they don't have, for example, NT doesn't have an MP. That should not be a reason for you to lock out ANT because it doesn't have a leader in the National Assembly, but it has support somewhere. So the regulations of registration of a political party should be strict, but not too strict enough to then create a situation of disgruntlement where those who have been refused registration want to do their politics by other means, by creating rebel groups and that kind of thing, which then leads to a general instability of the whole country. So there should be a careful balance of that issue.
All right, thank you. Keep those questions coming. I'll be able to share some of them with the panelists to respond to, but and I'll soon be opening it up to for a plenary discussion. But before I come to that, Frank, what ideally, looking at the context of Uganda, because I think everybody agrees that democracy is not a template that fits all. People argue that democracy should be customized in the context of the country. Looking at Uganda's political context, what is the best way of financing political parties? What would you recommend?
I agree that there's no one size fits all. And I agree that, but there's something key in any democratic system, that there are universal principles. Mm. And I think underlying those universal principles is the issue of legitimacy and the issue of accountability. those in power being accountable to those that they govern, and legitimacy that those in power have a right to be in power because there is the consent of those who are governed. Those are the key things. And we can find many other ways of mechanisms of working around that to bring something that is customized, that serves our interests best. Now, at the point where we are in terms of in terms of civic awareness, in terms of how sophisticated our politics is, we have to face the reality that many people have not yet even understood the role and importance of political parties beyond elections. Many people have not yet understood correctly the link between politics and their livelihoods. They think that when you choose somebody, you have given him an opportunity to go to the table to eat. They do not understand that the person you are giving the opportunity is going to determine the policies, to determine how you are going to end up living your life. So because they don't understand that, you cannot convince them tomorrow to put money or invest in a political party. At least we are not yet there. That being said, we need to do two things. One is that we also don't want to encourage, Dr. Walemera has been telling you about the proliferation of political parties after around the 2000 referendum. Also, if people just know that there is money available for political parties, as long as they hit a certain small threshold, then there could be many fortune hunters coming to politics to just access that money, which we also do not want to build that culture too, because that's another risk. But there are many other ways we can develop to find out a party that is serious. Parties that are serious have gotten certain characteristics. They have got distinct policy platforms. They have got a deliberate architecture of developing those policy alternatives. You can see that they are reaching out. They have got an agenda that they communicate. You can see a party that is serious. There are many mechanisms you can, like Dan said, that you can use an inclusive way of developing a mechanism to sieve out between the serious political parties and those which are briefcase holders, briefcase political parties for fortune hunters. When we establish who the serious parties, and this one does not have anything to do that you should have a member of parliament or not, there are other ways of we can agree on establishing that. But the moment that is done in an inclusive manner that is transparent, then we need to figure out what sort of funding we should make available. I had Kenya, somebody said, is it 5% or something? A certain percentage of the Kenyan GDP goes to this. It may not be, I don't intend to say we need to have a very huge one, but we need to have something that shows how serious we take politics to be. And of course, this has to be followed by very robust accountability and audit processes. I like the point Alice Alaso, Honorable Alaso raised about public funding giving an opportunity to political parties to begin practicing accountability in their own parties before even they come to attempt holding the national steering. I think that's a very interesting thing. But for now, the long and winded answer to your question is that for now, our best bet is public funding for political parties, but we should have a more distilled, consultatively generated mechanism of how we get this public funding to the political parties that need it, that have demonstrated seriousness, and seriousness does not mean just ability to appear on TV and speak from time to time, but connections with their constituents, distinct party programs, distinct ideological as we can look out for, and time allowing, we can contribute to that too. But for me, right now, I'm still a strong supporter of public funding for political parties as we move ahead with the civic battle in the population. to understand that these parties are theirs and they should be able to fund them themselves. They should be able to pay membership fees or subscription fees as the case may be, so they can actually own these parties. So these parties, some of these historical parties like the Democratic Party and Uganda People's Congress, I think at some time they used to have their members pay subscription fees. And some people even in my village are very proud. A man will pull out his card and show it to you. He has had it from the 60s, he has had it from the 80s, and they bought these cards and they loved their parties and they knew to some degree what their parties were standing for. Maybe our political parties themselves now need to reinvent themselves and be more appealing to their voters, so that they can build a strong ownership of those of their supporters. People need to move from just being supporters of candidates to becoming owners of the political programs of parties, because they believe those programs can present solutions for their societies and communities.
Interesting. Thank you. Doctor, do you want to weigh in on that one before I throw another question to you? But there's a question for Frank, which I'll come back to.
I think I don't have a lot to say about what he has said, but just to pick off one of the issues that possibly just to re-emphasize it is the issue of the parties becoming marketable, in quotes, marketable to the population. Many of the parties are not doing the proper political marketing. And consequently, as my colleague Rusa says, if you look at the, I teach a bit of history, the political and constitutional history of this country in a university. If you look at the initial leaders who began political parties here, they were not people of means. They were people, simple people. The people who began Uganda National Congress were simple people, teachers, people who did not have a very high, who were not highly educated, people who had left the World War and come back and had a few ideas on how to organize their society. For people who are not really highly qualified, really don't have a lot of resources. If they tell you, for example, one of the key leaders of UPC, what he would do to mobilize people, he would walk on foot to all sorts of places. And you see, the people out here, the population out here will see how you're behaving, and they'll know whether they would want to join the way you're marketing yourself politically. They will know whether they want to join your political party or not. When you travel to many other countries, the people that form these political parties, they find little things that appeal to human, to citizens. For example, let me give you a simple example. We have had a bit of shaking because they say the US has the best democracy and that kind of thing. But we had a bit of shaking of democracy. Those riots is a subset of the party within which he comes. He has very extreme views, but he appealed emotionally to a particular section of the people, and he sold that politically. He sold that to these rural people, farmers and so on. He sold that to these evangelicals. And you saw there was nothing, you could not do anything to Trump for them not to love Trump. Even if you say he had slept with a prostitute, they say, no. That is a man God has sent to deliver us. So we need to have leaders, political leaders within our society who are sitting down and strategically thinking through how to attract supporters, how to attract, and you saw with Trump, these people would even come and do all sorts of criminal activities on his behalf because he had said Trump himself with a few one-line sentences that have been cheated. You saw what they did because Trump had appealed to them and Trump had shown that he represents what they are. I know the ruling party and the president does a bit of this, but they still also don't do it effectively. I don't see it being done effectively within the opposition parties. Maybe DP, because of its roots from the Catholic Church and that kind of thing, and from one tribe. You don't see a political party that is going out to appeal emotionally to a particular set of people and then get them to support you. Obviously, once somebody has bought into you, then they are able to, for example, do simple things like buying a party card or contributing to the cause that political party espouses. If that is not there, then you are not going to have somebody buying a party card of even 2,000 shillings. They will not, because they just say, oh, he's there, he wants, like Rusa says, he wants to go to parliament to get some form of employment. And I've argued here before that one of the ways of getting genuine leaders in Uganda is reducing drastically the amount of money these people are receiving, so that we get real people who are real leaders coming through. That not only gets us quality leaders when we're just looking for jobs. B, it also reduces the violence. It reduces the violence during elections, because it's not a do or die. There is not much money you could get from parliament. You're just simply going there to represent people with a small stipend. But then it also reduces the effects of commercialization of politics. So you're not having somebody selling off their house in order to get to parliament. They are using normal money. In some of the countries you go to in the West, in the global North, you'll be surprised. You may not even know that actually there's an election in that country. You'll find the MP there at the supermarket with their posters, campaign posters, and handing them out. It won't be this. It's as if when we have campaigns here, not only by the way in Uganda, but in many African countries, it's as if the society has been possessed. It's as if the society is high on drugs, and people are doing all sorts of funny things. There's a lot of issues. So one of the key issues of making politics attractive to quality leaders, Frank here has been saying, when you go, you get surprised when you see the kind of people that are standing for serious positions. Somebody is standing for MP, but when you ask him, what are your issues? This person doesn't have any issues. That is his issue. We have had one of the MPs say that. Now I've finished eating. You see that kind of thing. That level of leadership is going to lead this country down the drain, because eventually when this individual gets into parliament, he cannot understand what is being said in there. It's very complicated stuff. No wonder some of these MPs go back to school and want to study law and that kind of thing. There are some of them, I'm not saying those are the ones, but some of them are in my classes at the university, trying to, because when they get in there, they get lost. If somebody is beginning to talk about the economy, you will get lost if you're just going there. They will get lost. The English will be too much, the statistics will be too much, everything will be too much for him. So one way is to pull out the money from this arrangement, so that people are looking at it as a service to the community and not a job.
Interesting. We have about 15 minutes or under 15 minutes to bring this discussion to a close. I have a final question for Frank, and I'll also, within that question, carry one of the questions coming from the panelists. This one speaks to, I think now, one of the biggest threats to financing of political parties or politics broadly is the issue of illicit financing, how, especially when you open it up to external parties to finance political parties, how this makes now either political actors, it could be a politician, a candidate, or a political party vulnerable to illicit financing, and some of them end up being hijacked and being driven by interests of self-seeking, either individuals or companies. US is battling with this, and yet US has some bit of a legal framework. And I know Uganda, there have been pockets and signs of our politics being hijacked by selfish interests. How best can political party funding be regulated to insulate political parties and candidates from this kind of risks? And as you answer that, there was even a question as a rejoinder whether it is very feasible for the Electoral Commission to perform this function of a political finance regulator beyond just managing elections, but also to the regulation of the financing aspects of money for political parties.
Okay, thank you very much. For starters, the point that you have just raised is a very serious point. We have made a number of studies have suggested that to stand a good chance to run an election in Uganda and succeed in most parts, anything between 300 to 500 million can work. So that technically is $100,000. $100,000 may seem a lot, and it is a lot to us here in Uganda. We can be alarmed to hear somebody has spent 100,000 or 200,000 to run for office. But in the global scheme of things, it is not a lot of money. You can imagine that a rich man in Saudi Arabia or the United States who can put aside $100 million can technically have the majority in your parliament if he chooses to. And if you don't have ways of blocking it, some person, and that person who can spend $100 million is not even in the top 10% of the rich people in the global north. That is a regular rich person can actually come to an African country, a third world country, a developing country like ours, and use money to completely hijack the system. So it is not completely far-fetched that our system can be hijacked. That's why I understand the spirit and rationale of the law that puts caps and makes it illegal and to do this. But now the question is, it is one thing to have a law that says don't do it, or if you do it, we shall punish you. I've already indicated that the punishment is a slap in the wrist, that if they catch you doing these bad things of bringing money from these places, they will charge you, they will make you pay 1.5 million shillings. That's a joke. But that aside, do we even have the capacity to investigate these kind of issues? Does the Financial Intelligence Authority of Uganda have the sufficient technical know-how and resources to do all the monitoring that is required to block this illicit funding? Why don't we begin by reducing the vulnerability of our political class through public funding as one way? There's no guarantee that if you give them money, they won't ask for more or look for more, but maybe you will reduce their vulnerability to this kind of thing. Of course, the fact that Uganda is a country with the resources, Uganda is a country that is located in the Greater region with a lot of influence interested in controlling this place. And therefore, it makes our politics very vulnerable. So that's the reason why, as we're talking about public finance, I was emphasizing on the issue of not divorcing it from the national security considerations, because they're also important. Unfortunately, sometimes when you talk about national security considerations, some people use that same argument to stifle political parties, to close them up because they're saying national security. I'm looking at it from a broader context, in the context I've just said. Now, the second question you asked me was whether the Electoral Commission is the best place for this. Me, actually, if I had my way, if I could contribute this conversation, I think would need another independent body to focus on political parties. There should be another independent political parties regulatory body. And it shouldn't be focused just on the question of money, political financing. For example, there are many other issues that affect political parties. If you want to have an organization that is focusing on political parties beyond just the funding, there is political party relations, there is accountability, there is even the code of conduct. Who is enforcing the political party's code of conduct? Who, I mean, all these things that we're attempting to do in informal spaces, like IPOD, like with the support of NIMD and the rest of the people. Some of these places would be located in a home that is focused on political parties. Some sort of, I don't know what that name would be, but some sort of political parties forum or regulatory something. Maybe something like NEC, NCF, but outside the Electoral Commission that actually has a mandate to keep an eye on the things around political parties and dedicated to building political parties into vibrant, strong institutions that serve the interests of the country. Electoral Commission right now is so busy with elections. Even if you go to the Electoral Commission, they just have a political parties desk that is just concerned with receiving minutes of meetings of political parties, making sure that those minutes are there. Then when the money comes, they forward it to political parties quickly, get the accountabilities and file them. That's not enough. I think this role would be removed from the Electoral Commission and we leave the Electoral Commission to do what it does best, which is administer elections and focus on things to do with elections and referenda, and have another entity that can be focused on political parties, because political parties are important. And I think that would be my take on that one.
Yeah, Doctor, in 5 minutes, because I have only 7 minutes left. So in the 5 minutes, probably can contribute to that discussion. But also, as you contribute to that discussion, there was a question which I would throw to you. It came through the from the participants. Someone was wondering, what should political parties share in common in any given country, despite the differences they have? What is that one thing that they all should converge on? That one point they should converge on, the commonality that should unite political parties in Uganda. Did I lose Doctor? I don't seem to have Doctor. I think I lost the connection of Doctor. Doctor, are you there? Okay, I seem to have lost Doctor, and I think this leaves me with Frank. There was that question I wanted to do justice to. One of the members following us raised the question. I think he's wondering whether, irrespective of the differences political parties have and differences in ideologies, and what is that? What are those things that ideally should make political parties have a point of convergence in Uganda?
Sorry, I had gotten a disruption. What was your question again?
There's a question coming through from the chats. One of the participants wants to know that irrespective of the differences political parties have, could be in ideology or whatever it is, what are some of those things that should ideally be a point of convergence for political parties to converge on for this country?
Yeah, there are many issues that are cross-party. For example, we are just in the middle of a COVID-19 pandemic. COVID-19 pandemic should not be a problem of the NRM. Neither should it be a problem of the government of Uganda per se. COVID-19 pandemic is a national problem. And it would be good if we had approached it from a cross-party manner. Political parties can converge and share ideas on how to deal with an issue like that. Issues like environmental degradation and threats to our environment. Issues like the foreign policy and how we relate. Issues like regional integration and how we should proceed with our neighbors. And some of these issues could be issues of a cross-party nature. The kind of conversations that have been supporting in IPOD are conversations around things we think are so national in character that should not be left just to the confines of individual political parties. The moment we realize that all political parties are working towards the betterment of our country, we would realize that it makes sense for them to have conversations, even if some of them are not in power, especially if those in power have the magnanimity and humility to listen to ideas. The problem sometimes is that we only want to argue when we are in before the glare of the cameras because we want to impress our voters. But outside the cameras, we should have safe spaces where political leaders from different political parties can really converse about this important matter called Uganda and the future we are all striving towards. So I think there are many things that should bring political parties together beyond competing for power, because at any one given time, there'll always be only one of them who will be in power. As we can, political maturity in the leaders themselves, but maturity also in the wider political class, and ask the supporters of these political leaders. We need to understand that it is not a life and death, it is not enmity, it is different opinions on trying to improve this country God has given us, our country, Uganda.
Thank you so much. About 2 minutes to the top of the hour, and that's enough for us to bring this to a close. I had with me Frank Rusa, who is the first African country representative of the Netherlands issue for multi-party democracy. That's no mean feat, and he's also the current executive secretary for the Inter-Party Organization for Dialogue, IPOD, a platform that promotes dialogue alongside political competition. I also had with me Dr. Waliemera Daniel, who is an electoral reform scholar and has published a number of studies on this subject of campaign financing, and for over 14 years was engaged in politics, at some point serving as the Secretary General for the Conservative Party, CP. He was the pioneer chairperson for the Council of Secretaries of the General for the Inter-Party Organization Dialogue, IPOD. And I also had with me briefly, we had Alice Alaso, who joined us for about 30 minutes, is the current coordinator for ACFIM transformation, but also formerly served as the Secretary General for FDC and also as deputy. And we were supposed to have Norbert Mao, who checked on us briefly, had connection problems. Chairman Mao, probably next time we'll be able to sort out the problem of connection, to have Mao with us in this conversation. And we were discussing public funding of political parties in Uganda's democratization process, looking at the lessons from the 2021 general elections. Thank you, all our participants. Thank you, panelists, for being part of this conversation, making it very colorful. My name is Felix Kafuma, who is the moderator for this session. Our next webinar will be on how money is being used to control voter consent and how that kills our democracy. From me to you all, bye-bye, stay safe. Have a great evening.
Thank you so much, Felix. It was nice to meet you. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you. All the listeners, have a good week.
Right, bye-bye.